Marcus had always found solace in the world of colors and strokes, his refuge from a reality that seemed often indifferent to the magnitude of his existence. His art, vibrant and full of intensity, spoke of unspoken histories, of battles long forgotten by most, but preserved in the deepest corners of his soul. The gallery was his destination today, a place he'd hoped to make an impact, where his work would find a home among those who appreciated the depth of its meaning. As Marcus stepped into the cold, pristine art gallery, he couldn't help but feel a knot of uncertainty in his stomach. The gallery owner, Mr. Thompson, was exactly what he'd expected, an arrogant, middle-aged man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his graying hair combed meticulously. The air around him seemed to buzz with an invisible aura of superiority, as though he believed art and talent belonged only to those with money and power. Marcus had entered the gallery to submit his work, his paintings, filled with rich, abstract patterns, carefully rolled up and tucked under his arm. He had heard rumors of this place being a hotspot for influential collectors and art critics, a place where reputations were either made or broken. And Marcus wasn't just another artist with a dream, he carried with him a legacy, one his family had passed down for generations, though it remained dormant within him, waiting for the right moment to awaken. He was certain that his paintings were much more than mere visual experiences. They were messages, encoded in a language only those attuned to the past could understand. It was through his art that he would reveal humanity's true potential, even though he had yet to fully grasp what that potential was. But today was the day he would present his art to the world, to this gallery, to see if anyone else could decipher what was hidden beneath the strokes. The moment he stepped further inside, he was greeted by the cold gaze of Mr. Thompson. The gallery owner barely looked at him, too busy inspecting a painting on the wall to notice the young artist approach. Marcus stood silently, waiting for a sign, a gesture of recognition. He knew he wasn't the first artist to come through these doors, and likely wouldn't be the last, but there was something different about his work, something that set it apart. Mr. Thompson finally noticed him standing there, his eyes flickering over Marcus with a disinterested glance. "And you are?" the gallery owner asked, his voice tinged with an air of indifference, as though Marcus was yet another unknown aspiring artist who would eventually fade into obscurity. "I'm Marcus. I've come to show you my art," Marcus replied calmly, unbothered by the dismissive tone. He could feel the unspoken judgment in the air. It was always like this, a pattern he'd grown accustomed to. People looked at him, at his dark skin, his unconventional approach to art, and saw only what they expected to see, a struggling artist with no real future. "Art, huh?" Mr. Thompson scoffed, leaning back in his chair as he crossed his arms. "I see a lot of it around here, but I don't have time for just anyone's attempt at expression. What makes yours special?" Marcus remained quiet for a moment, taking in the skepticism that lingered in the air. He could feel the weight of generations behind him, warriors who had fought against the impossible, who had stood their ground when all seemed lost. His family lineage, shrouded in mystery, had passed down secrets not only of art but of humanity's lost potential. He didn't need to explain himself to this man. His art would speak for him. "I'll let the paintings speak for themselves," Marcus said softly, unrolling one of his canvases. It was a swirling mass of colors, dark reds and golds intermingled with abstract shapes, patterns that looked almost otherworldly. The brushstrokes were bold and unrestrained, and energy poured directly from his soul onto the canvas. Mr. Thompson's expression shifted from amusement to boredom as he glanced at the painting. His lips curled slightly, as though he were suppressing a laugh. "Interesting," he muttered. "But it's a little chaotic, don't you think? This isn't the kind of thing that people are going to hang in their living rooms." Marcus remained calm, unfazed by the harsh critique. He had anticipated this. People never understood his art at first. But one thing was clear, Mr. Thompson had no idea what he was truly looking at. The painting was more than just a display of emotion, it contained a secret that the artist himself was only beginning to understand. It was the visual manifestation of humanity's hidden warrior spirit, the strength that had long been dormant, waiting to be awakened. Your work might do better in a modern art museum, or somewhere people look at for a minute and then forget about, Mr. Thompson continued. But in a place like this? We deal with high-end collectors who appreciate refined, tasteful art. This? He gestured dismissively toward the canvas. This won't sell. Marcus's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. The gallery owner couldn't see it. He didn't understand that Marcus's art wasn't meant to be merely refined or tasteful. It was a reflection of the human spirit, the untapped power within them. Humanity's warrior nature had always been misunderstood, dismissed as irrelevant or naive. But Marcus knew better. For centuries, humans had been underestimated by alien forces, by their own kind, and even by those who claimed to appreciate art. Yet here they stood, the first great warrior species, rising against all odds. Marcus's art was a representation of that unyielding strength. It wasn't chaotic, it was revolutionary. But Mr. Thompson would never know this. He would continue to see the art for what he wanted to see, as something to profit off of, something to hang in galleries for the wealthy. What he didn't realize was that Marcus was not just an artist, he was part of something much larger, something the gallery owner would soon come to regret dismissing. You seem very confident for someone with such unconventional art, Mr. Thompson remarked, still fixated on the painting. You might be a bit too bold for this business. But, he added with a faint smile, I'm not one to completely dismiss someone right away. I'll give you $100 for this piece. The insult stung, but Marcus did not flinch. He had anticipated the lowball offer. The offer was not what mattered. What mattered was that Mr. Thompson could not see the value in what was before him. I'll pass, Marcus replied, rolling the canvas back up and slipping it under his arm. Thank you for your time. He turned and walked out of the gallery, feeling the weight of the future on his shoulders. The gallery owner would never know the true power of what he had dismissed. But Marcus knew, and that was enough for now. As the door closed behind him, Marcus's thoughts began to shift. His family's legacy, hidden in the depths of his bloodline, was calling to him. The time was coming when the world would realize what he was truly capable of. And when it did, the gallery owner, Mr. Thompson, and everyone who had doubted him would realize too late that they had dismissed the first great warrior species of humanity. After leaving the gallery, Marcus felt a peculiar sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't the disappointment of rejection, he'd come to expect it. It was something deeper, as if a part of him, an ancient part, had stirred within him, responding to the gallery owner's dismissive attitude. The day's events had awakened something latent, a force inside him that he couldn't yet explain. As he walked through the busy city streets, the noise and chaos of the world around him seemed distant. His mind wandered back to his childhood, to the stories his grandmother had told him about their family's lineage. Stories of warriors, not of the kind that wielded weapons or fought battles on traditional battlefields, but of beings who understood the very essence of strength and resilience. She spoke of a time when humanity had been the last line of defense against alien forces that sought to subjugate them, and how their ancestors had fought with unparalleled courage, a warrior spirit that was passed down through the generations. Remember, Marcus, his grandmother had said, her voice a soft but firm whisper in his ear, your bloodline carries the strength of warriors who fought for the survival of humankind. You are part of something much bigger than yourself. At the time, Marcus had dismissed her words as mere family folklore. A romanticized version of history meant to inspire pride. But today, as he walked away from the gallery, those stories began to resonate with him in a way they never had before. The rejection he'd faced wasn't just an insult to his art, it was a signal, a reminder of the underestimation that had defined humanity's history. Just like his art, humanity had been dismissed, misunderstood, and rejected time and again. Yet, just like the warriors of his ancestry, humanity had survived and thrived. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, the weight of something pressing against his chest. It was as if his subconscious was screaming for him to understand something crucial, something hidden deep within his blood. Finally, unable to ignore the sensation, he got out of bed and made his way to his studio, the space where he'd painted countless pieces, many of which were similar to the one he'd presented at the gallery. His brushes and paints lay scattered around the room, but it wasn't the tools that called to him. It was the canvas. The one he had rolled up earlier that day, the one Mr. Thompson had mocked. He unrolled it slowly, carefully, as if preparing for a revelation. As he stared at the painting, the chaotic, swirling patterns began to shift in his mind, taking on new meaning. The shapes were no longer just abstract forms, they were symbols, signs that his mind hadn't been able to process fully before. It was as though a veil had lifted, revealing the true purpose behind the art. He stepped closer, and his eyes focused on the central figure within the painting, a human warrior, standing tall against an ominous backdrop of alien ships hovering in the distance. The warrior was not just a soldier, he was an embodiment of humanity's strength, standing alone but resolute. The brushstrokes, though rough, had purpose. There was an energy, a movement captured in each line, each color, that spoke of ancient struggles, battles fought against forces much greater than themselves. Humanity's warrior spirit was alive in this figure. As Marcus stood before the painting, a strange sensation washed over him, a feeling that he was no longer just looking at his creation. It was as if he had stepped into the scene itself, surrounded by the energy of the past, the warriors of his lineage standing with him, urging him to understand his true purpose. The art was a key, and the canvas was a map to unlocking something much larger than he could have imagined. Suddenly, Marcus's hand reached for the ancient relic his grandmother had left him, a small pendant passed down through generations. It had always seemed like a simple trinket, a family heirloom with little significance beyond its sentimental value. But as he held it in his hand now, it felt alive, pulsing with an energy he couldn't comprehend. The pendant was intricately designed, featuring a symbol he'd never fully understood, a stylized warrior figure, surrounded by a circular pattern of stars. His pulse quickened as he connected the dots. The pendant was a marker, a symbol of his lineage. The warrior it depicted was not just a figure from the past, it was a reminder of who he was meant to become. The art he had created, the painting that Mr. Thompson had mocked, was part of something greater, a message encoded within the strokes and colors, a blueprint for the future. Marcus understood now. The art he created was not just a reflection of his personal struggles or his interpretation of the world around him. It was a form of communication, an ancient language that connected him to the warriors of his bloodline, to the ones who had fought for humanity's survival against the very same forces that sought to control the galaxy. His art was a call to action, a reminder to humanity of their strength, of their true potential. But it wasn't just the art that held the key. It was Marcus himself. He wasn't merely an artist, he was the descendant of those ancient warriors, and the time had come for him to awaken that dormant power within. His family's legacy had been passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And that moment had arrived. The realization hit him like a wave, and for the first time, he felt a connection to something much larger than himself. He wasn't just an artist struggling to make a name for himself. He was part of a lineage that had been preparing for this moment, for the day when humanity's warrior spirit would rise again. The aliens who had once dismissed humanity as weak and inconsequential would soon learn how wrong they were. Just as Mr. Thompson had underestimated his art, the universe had underestimated humanity's power. Marcus's art was just the beginning. It was a signal, a warning to the universe that humanity was not to be dismissed. They were the first great warrior species, and it was time for the world to recognize their true strength. As the night wore on, Marcus stood before his canvas, the vision of his ancestors clear in his mind. The time had come to take action. He would no longer allow himself to be underestimated. He would not allow humanity to be dismissed. In the silence of his studio, surrounded by his creations, Marcus made a vow to himself. He would bring the legacy of his bloodline into the light. And he would do it through his art, through his message, and through the strength of his own warrior spirit. The revelation had only just begun. Marcus spent the next few weeks consumed by his art. What had once been a creative outlet, a personal exploration of the world through colors and shapes, had transformed into something much greater. His paintings no longer felt like mere expressions of emotion or thoughts, they were portals, each one carrying him closer to an understanding of his true identity. Every time he stood in front of his canvases, it felt as if the warriors of his ancestors were watching him, their spirits guiding his hand. The energy he had once felt as a distant, almost mystical concept was now undeniable. It was a power coursing through him, through his blood, waking up his latent abilities. He could feel it in his muscles, in the way his senses sharpened, and in the way his heart seemed to beat in sync with the rhythm of his paintings. His art was no longer just a reflection of his inner world, it was a manifestation of his lineage, the strength of the warrior ancestors he had never truly understood until now. Each night, as Marcus worked, he would study the pendant his grandmother had passed down to him. It seemed to pulse in his hand, as though reacting to his thoughts. The symbol etched into its surface, a stylized warrior surrounded by stars, now seemed to glow faintly in the dark of his studio. It was as if the pendant itself held the key to unlocking his true power. In the quiet of his studio, Marcus would often trace the symbol with his fingers, lost in thought. The more he touched the pendant, the more he felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, like a deep connection to something ancient, something that had been dormant for centuries. He began to understand that his art was not just personal. It was a key to something far larger, a legacy that stretched back to a time when humanity fought to defend itself against an alien invasion. The realization hit him one evening, as the dim light of his studio reflected off the edges of the pendant. The symbolism in his paintings, the strength in his brushstrokes, wasn't just about artistic expression. They were messages from the past, encoded instructions left for the descendants of humanity's greatest warriors. Marcus wasn't just creating art, he was unlocking a forgotten history. His works held the very essence of humanity's survival. He understood now, his bloodline carried a unique gift, a power passed down through generations. It wasn't just the ability to paint or create, it was the ability to harness the primal warrior spirit that had once fought against alien forces to protect humanity. These warriors had never truly left, their power had simply been forgotten, buried beneath centuries of history. But it wasn't just his art that was changing, Marcus himself was beginning to feel a transformation. His body felt different. Stronger. More attuned to the world around him. His reflexes were quicker. His senses seemed to heighten. In the silence of his studio, he could hear the faintest hum of energy in the air, a low vibration that seemed to resonate with the power within him. He had always been a normal man, an artist with a dream. But now, something else was emerging. It was as if his mind, body, and spirit were aligning with the ancient legacy that coursed through his veins. The more he painted, the more he felt his ancestors' strength within him, guiding him. One evening, as he worked on a new piece, Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the energy within him to flow freely. When he opened his eyes, he saw the painting in a completely different light. The canvas before him had changed. The swirling patterns, the abstract forms, now seemed to have depth, as though they were alive. He could see shapes within the chaos, an army of warriors, each one moving in harmony, as if preparing for battle. The brushstrokes were not just chaotic, they were the echoes of something far more significant. They were the preparations for a war, a battle that had been waged long before his time. Suddenly, it hit him, his ancestors hadn't just been fighting for survival. They had been fighting for the future of humanity. The alien forces that had once invaded Earth hadn't disappeared, they had retreated into the far reaches of space, biding their time. And now, humanity's warriors, the first great warrior species, were being called upon once more. Marcus's heart raced as he realized the full extent of his awakening. He wasn't just an artist. He was a descendant of humanity's greatest warriors, the ones who had defended Earth against alien invaders in the past. The power within him was awakening, and with it came a responsibility he had never imagined. His art wasn't just a form of expression, it was a signal, a warning to the universe that humanity was not weak, that they were not just a species to be discarded. The aliens who had once underestimated humanity, who had thought them inferior, would soon learn how wrong they were. They had no idea that the first great warrior species had never truly faded, they had simply been lying dormant, waiting for the right time to rise again. But Marcus was only beginning to understand the scope of this revelation. There were more paintings to be made, more pieces to unlock the full extent of the legacy he had inherited. His art was not just his own, it was part of a greater plan, a mission to awaken humanity's dormant warrior spirit and prepare them for the challenges ahead. The more he painted, the clearer the path became. The once confusing symbols and abstract forms on his canvases now seemed to make sense, like a roadmap to a destiny he hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. Each brushstroke, each color choice, was a message, telling him what he needed to do, how he needed to prepare, and who he needed to reach. There was more to humanity's survival than art, it was about awakening a primal strength, an ancient power that had always been a part of them. The painting in front of him seemed to glow in the dim light of the studio. It was no longer just a canvas, it was a call to action. Marcus knew now that the world was on the cusp of a new era. And he, the descendant of ancient warriors, would be at the forefront of it. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a warrior. And the time to awaken humanity had come. The days that followed were a blur. Marcus's life, once quiet and solitary, had been consumed by the awakening power within him. His art, which he had long treated as his personal voice, had transformed into something else entirely. It was now a channel through which he could tap into an ancient force, one that had been waiting for centuries to resurface. The more he painted, the more he felt a deep connection to something far greater than himself, a collective consciousness of humanity's past, the warriors who had fought and bled for their survival. One evening, as he worked late in the studio, a strange feeling overcame him. The room seemed to grow colder, and the faint hum of energy that had once been subtle became a loud, pulsating thrum. It was as if the air itself had shifted, vibrating with an otherworldly energy. His hand froze mid-brushstroke, and he looked around, sensing that something had changed. For the first time, he didn't just feel the power within him. He felt it all around him, like the walls were closing in, the very fabric of the universe shifting. The pendant his grandmother had given him began to glow faintly, its star-shaped symbol pulsing in sync with the vibrations in the room. Suddenly, everything clicked. The pendant was not just a family heirloom, it was a key, an artifact that held the true history of humanity's warrior past. It was a direct link to the warriors who had fought to protect Earth from the alien invaders. The energy that had been stirring within Marcus was more than just a creative surge, it was a full-scale awakening of the warrior spirit that had been dormant in human blood for generations. Marcus stood up, feeling a surge of adrenaline. His body felt stronger, as if the very essence of his ancestors had merged with him. His senses were heightened, his reflexes faster. He could hear the distant hum of energy, a subtle frequency that only he seemed to perceive. The studio, once just a place of artistic creation, now felt like a battlefield, a place where humanity's survival depended on his ability to harness the power that was awakening within him. He walked toward the large canvas he had been working on, his eyes locking onto the image of the warrior figure he had painted. The figure, though abstract at first, now seemed to pulse with life, as if it were no longer a mere creation of his hands, but a living entity. The warrior stood tall and unyielding, surrounded by alien ships that loomed in the background, waiting for the moment to strike. The warrior's eyes were focused, determined. He was the embodiment of humanity's warrior spirit, powerful, resolute, ready to fight. As Marcus stared at the painting, he realized that it was not just an artistic creation. It was a vision, a prophecy, a glimpse into the future. The alien invaders had never truly left. They had simply waited for humanity to forget its strength, its power. But now, humanity was ready to awaken again. The first great warrior species was no longer dormant. The time had come to fight once more. Marcus's thoughts raced. His art had always been his way of expressing himself, but now it was clear, it was a battle cry, a rallying point for humanity to realize its true potential. The alien forces had underestimated them once, thinking they were weak, that they were a species too fragile to withstand an invasion. But humanity was far more than that. They were warriors, and the time had come for them to prove it. The vibrations in the room grew stronger, and Marcus felt a deep, undeniable pull. he knew he had to act. The power within him wasn't just for personal discovery, it was for a greater purpose. He could no longer keep this power to himself. He had to share it, awaken others to their potential, to the truth of humanity's warrior legacy. The first step was clear: he needed to reach out. He needed to find those who could help him spread the message, those who could carry the torch of humanity's warrior spirit into the world. His art would be the beacon, the signal to others who were ready to awaken. But how? Marcus didn't have the answers yet. All he knew was that his paintings were more than just images, they were blueprints for the future. The warrior in his canvas was not just a soldier. It was humanity's collective will to survive, to fight, and to protect. He had seen the way the alien ships in his painting loomed ominously in the background. It was a reminder that the battle was coming. But this time, humanity would be ready. With newfound determination, Marcus took the pendant in his hand, holding it tightly. He felt its power coursing through his fingers, a surge of energy that seemed to flow from the very core of his being. The pendant's glow intensified, and Marcus closed his eyes, allowing the energy to fill him completely. The hum around him grew louder, vibrating with the ancient power of his ancestors. He was no longer just a man. He was a part of something much larger, something that stretched back through the annals of time. He was connected to every warrior who had ever fought for humanity's survival. The pendant's glow reached its peak, and suddenly, Marcus's mind was flooded with visions, glimpses of humanity's past, present, and future. He saw the ancient warriors fighting against the alien invaders, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization, each strike purposeful and deadly. He saw their strength, their unity, and he understood now that their power had always been within humanity. It had never left. It had simply been forgotten, buried beneath layers of history and doubt. And now, it was awakening again. The vision shifted. He saw the future, a future where humanity stood united against a new alien threat, one that would not make the same mistake the invaders had made before. The alien forces would soon return. But this time, humanity would be ready. This time, the first great warrior species would stand together, no longer divided, no longer uncertain of their place in the universe. They would rise as one, and they would not be defeated. Marcus opened his eyes, his breath shallow as he processed what he had just experienced. He could feel the power surging within him, his connection to the warriors of the past clearer than ever. His purpose was no longer unclear. He was part of something much larger than his own life. He was part of a movement that would awaken humanity to their true potential. The first great warrior species had never disappeared. They had been waiting, hidden in the blood of every human. And now, the time had come to rise again. Marcus knew what he had to do. He would use his art, his message, to awaken others. The paintings were the key, and he would use them to unlock humanity's dormant power. Together, they would rise. Together, they would fight. The awakening had begun. The days passed in a blur, each one more intense than the last. Marcus's world had been turned upside down, his life no longer just about art but about preparing for something much larger. His vision of humanity's warrior past and future had become a guiding force, a call to action that he could no longer ignore. But even as he felt the power rising within him, he knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed to reach others, awaken them to the same realization that had transformed him. Marcus began reaching out to people, old friends, fellow artists, activists, anyone who would listen. He knew that not everyone would understand, but he had to try. The more he talked about the awakening, about humanity's untapped potential, the more he realized how few were truly ready to hear it. But then, one evening, he received an unexpected message that would change everything. It was from a woman named Claire, a fellow artist and longtime friend who had always been drawn to Marcus's work but had never truly understood his deeper motivations. Claire had been following his recent work, the pieces that seemed to pulse with a new, raw energy. She had seen the transformation in his art and was intrigued, though still skeptical. She asked if she could come to see him, to talk about what was going on. The meeting took place in his studio, the place where Marcus had first felt the stirring of his newfound power. Claire arrived late in the afternoon, the soft light of dusk spilling into the room. She was a talented painter in her own right, but her style was different, more abstract, more focused on the psychological aspects of human experience. Marcus had always respected her work, but he had never felt like they shared the same vision. When Claire stepped into the studio, she stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes locking onto the canvas that had consumed Marcus for days. It was the painting of the warrior, the one that had first unlocked his sense of purpose. She gazed at it for a long moment, as if seeing it for the first time. "Marcus," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper, this is different. Your art, it's like it's alive. There's something about it, something I can't quite put into words. It's not just a painting anymore, is it?" Marcus looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "No, Claire. It's not just a painting. It's a message. It's a call to action." Claire's eyes narrowed, and she walked closer to the canvas. "A call to action? What are you talking about?" Marcus felt a deep breath fill his chest, as if the words had been building inside him for days. "I've been seeing things, Claire, visions, memories that don't belong to me. My ancestors were warriors, and they fought to protect humanity from an alien force. That fight never truly ended. The aliens will return, and humanity needs to be ready. They need to remember who they really are, the first great warrior species. And that's why I'm painting these pieces. To awaken something that's been dormant for centuries." Claire stared at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. There was none. Marcus's conviction was palpable, like the very air around him had changed. She had never seen him like this before, focused, determined, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. "Are you saying?" Claire began slowly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you saying that humanity is supposed to fight aliens? Again?" Marcus nodded. "Yes. And we're not ready yet, but we will be. The art is the key. It's the signal that something is awakening, something powerful. Humanity has been asleep, and we've forgotten who we are. But we've always had the strength. We just need to remember it." For a long moment, Claire didn't speak. She simply stood there, taking in his words. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice a mixture of awe and hesitation. "Marcus. I want to believe you. I do. But this is insane. How can we possibly fight aliens? How can your art, how can any of this lead to that?" Marcus smiled, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. He couldn't back down now. He could feel the pull of the warriors who had fought before him, and they were with him, guiding him. "I don't know exactly how yet," he admitted, "but I know this, it starts with us. We can't wait for the aliens to arrive and catch us off guard. We need to awaken the warrior spirit inside us, every single one of us. And I believe my art can be the spark that sets it off." Claire stood silently, her gaze fixed on him. The skepticism was still there, but there was something else, too, a flicker of understanding, of possibility. Slowly, she nodded. "I don't know what this means, Marcus, but I'll help you. If there's a chance, no matter how slim, that what you're saying is true, then we need to be ready." Marcus felt a surge of relief and gratitude. He had known Claire would be the one to understand, even if only in part. "I don't know how this will all play out," he said quietly, "but I can't do it alone. We need others. We need people who can see beyond the surface, who can understand what's coming." Claire looked around the studio, her eyes catching on the other pieces Marcus had created. Some were abstract, some were portraits, but all were infused with the same energy, the same urgency. They were not just works of art, they were cries for help, warnings that would be understood only by those ready to listen. "I know just the people," she said. "But we have to be careful. Not everyone will be ready for this." Marcus nodded. "I know. But we don't have time to wait. The sooner we start, the sooner we can prepare. And so, with that simple promise, their mission began. They would gather a group of individuals who could help spread the message, people who could awaken others to the same truth Marcus had discovered. But the stakes were high, and the path ahead was uncertain. Would they be able to awaken humanity in time? Would the world believe them? Or would the aliens return before humanity could rediscover its strength? Only time would tell. The news of Marcus's awakening spread slowly at first, like a whisper passing through a crowded room. Claire was instrumental in helping him reach out to a network of like-minded individuals, people who had always sensed there was more to the world than what met the eye, though they hadn't known what that more was. But now, with Marcus's words ringing in their ears, the spark of realization began to spread. The world was not just a place of mundane existence, it was a battlefield, a place where humanity's survival depended on its ability to awaken an ancient, warrior-like strength that had been hidden in their bloodlines for generations. It started with a small group, Claire, Marcus, and a handful of others, each with their own unique talents, perspectives, and skills. They were all artists, activists, writers, and thinkers who had long felt disconnected from the world around them. But Marcus's message had awakened something in them. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment their whole lives, though none of them had known exactly what they were waiting for. Their first task was to meet in secret, away from prying eyes. The world wasn't ready for their message, and they knew that revealing too much too soon could cause mass panic. They needed to build their strength, gather their knowledge, and prepare for the coming battle without attracting too much attention. But the first step was clear: Marcus had to share his story, his awakening, with those who were ready to hear it. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place where the hum of daily life could not drown out the urgency of their mission. As they sat around a corner table, Marcus shared everything: his awakening, the power he had tapped into, the visions he had seen, and the paintings that had begun to take on lives of their own. Each person listened intently, some with skepticism, others with rapt attention, but all with the understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding. One of the people in the group, an experienced activist named Julian, was the first to speak after Marcus finished. "So, what's the plan? How do we get this message out to the world without being seen as lunatics? Because if we just start shouting that aliens are coming and humanity needs to wake up, we'll be laughed off the map." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the very real concern. "I get it. We can't just throw this out there. We need to build a network, quietly, without drawing attention. That's why our first step is to use the art, to spread the message without directly saying what it is. The paintings are not just art, they are symbols, each one holding a piece of the awakening. People who see them will start to feel something, a sense that there's more to the world than what they've been told." Claire leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Exactly. We can't just show people alien ships and warriors and expect them to believe it. We need to tap into the deeper currents of human consciousness, to stir something primal inside them. The paintings are the key. The moment people look at them, they'll feel the call to something greater, something that's been hidden inside them all along." Another member of the group, a writer named Lila, spoke up. "So, how do we get the right people to see the art? We can't just hang it in galleries and hope someone notices." "We start small," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We send it to underground networks, art collectives, online communities, anyone who's looking for something more, something deeper. We'll work with influencers who aren't afraid to take risks, who understand the power of hidden symbols and messages. It's not about fame, it's about creating a ripple effect, a subtle movement that will grow over time." Julian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "So, we're creating a subculture, a kind of resistance movement, without being obvious about it. We let the art do the talking, and as people begin to question, we provide them with more. They'll start to see the truth behind the message." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "This is bigger than any one person or group. It's about awakening humanity to its true potential. We'll start with the art, but eventually, we'll need to show people that they, too, have the power within them." The alien invaders will return, and we need to be ready. We need to make sure the first great warrior species rises again. The group sat in silence for a moment, each of them processing what they had just heard. It was one thing to talk about an idea, a concept, but another entirely to commit to it, to believe in it with everything they had. But Marcus's conviction was infectious. The fire in his eyes was undeniable. He wasn't just speaking about a future, they were on the cusp of creating it. After a long pause, Lila spoke again. If we're going to do this, we need to be careful. We can't rush into it. We need to find the right people to help us, people who will understand the significance of the message without turning it into a spectacle. I agree, Marcus said. This can't be about fame or attention. It has to be about awakening those who are ready, those who can see the truth. Once we have a foundation, we can expand, but only when we're sure we're ready. And so, the group began their work in earnest. They started by creating anonymous social media accounts, posting cryptic images of Marcus's paintings alongside quotes and messages that hinted at the truth, but never fully revealed it. They shared their work with underground art circles, where people were more open to alternative ideas and hidden meanings. Slowly, the message began to spread, like an infection growing beneath the surface. The whispers had grown louder. What had once been a handful of like-minded individuals gathered in secrecy had expanded into a full-fledged underground movement. People from all walks of life were starting to feel the pull, the sense that there was something more to their existence than the mundane routine of everyday life. Marcus's art had become the cornerstone of this awakening, its images seeping into the collective consciousness like seeds planted in fertile soil. The messages were becoming clearer, the warriors of humanity beginning to rise from the depths of their memories. The collective energy that had been dormant for centuries was now awakening, slowly but steadily. People were beginning to tap into their inner strength, to sense that the time was approaching when they would need to fight, to protect their world. And yet, despite all the progress they had made, there was a lingering fear, an overwhelming sense of uncertainty about what lay ahead. For Marcus, that fear had transformed into something else entirely, determination. He knew the aliens would return. He had seen it in his visions, felt it in the vibrations that pulsed through him whenever he touched his paintings. The invaders were not just coming, they were already here, hiding in plain sight, watching as humanity unknowingly prepared for their next confrontation. The group had prepared for months, carefully selecting and training those who had awakened, teaching them to channel their inner strength and tap into the warrior spirit. They had even begun constructing hidden bases, fortified locations where they could regroup and strategize when the time came. But no one could have predicted how quickly things would escalate. It began with strange occurrences, flickers in the sky, sightings of unusual lights in remote areas, and an unsettling sense of something foreign in the air. At first, they were dismissed as mere anomalies, natural phenomena that had no true explanation. But as the events grew more frequent, the whispers began to take on a darker tone. People started to report sightings of ships that seemed to vanish before they could be properly identified, ships that hovered silently in the sky before disappearing into the night. Then, one day, it happened. The first attack came without warning. A quiet evening in the studio turned into chaos. Marcus and Claire were working late, discussing their next steps when the ground shook beneath them. At first, it was subtle, a low rumble, like an earthquake. But then, the sound grew louder, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Marcus's heart raced, and he looked at Claire, his instincts kicking into overdrive. "It's them," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with fear and urgency. "They've come." The room was filled with the sound of sirens, the warning bells ringing out across the city. But the panic wasn't just in the streets. It was in the air itself, a palpable sense of dread that gripped everyone, even those who hadn't yet been awakened to the truth. People were running, shouting, scrambling for safety, unaware of the true nature of the threat that had arrived. "Come on," Marcus said, grabbing Claire by the arm. "We need to move. Now." They ran out of the building, rushing into the street where chaos was already unfolding. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, illuminated by flashes of light as ships descended from above. These were no ordinary spacecraft, their sleek, metallic surfaces gleamed in the dim light of the evening, and their size was immense. The air was thick with the sound of their engines, and as they hovered above the city, they unleashed a devastating barrage of energy. The streets erupted in chaos as the first wave of alien forces struck. People screamed, buildings crumbled under the force of the blasts, and the world seemed to be falling apart. But amidst the panic, Marcus felt a strange calm wash over him. The awakening had begun, and humanity was finally going to prove itself. He reached for the pendant his grandmother had given him, feeling its warmth in his hand. The energy inside him surged, and for the first time, he understood fully what he had to do. He wasn't just a man anymore, he was the living embodiment of humanity's warrior spirit, and he was ready to lead the charge. He turned to Claire, his voice filled with resolve. "It's time." Together, they made their way to the Hidden Network's headquarters, where the others were already preparing for the battle. The warriors were assembling, each of them equipped with the knowledge and strength they had gained through Marcus's teachings. The time for secrecy was over. The time for action had come. As they entered the base, Marcus saw the faces of those who had been waiting for this moment. They were scared, but they were ready. They understood what was at stake. They understood that humanity was no longer a fragile species, it was the first great warrior species, and now was the time to prove it. "We fight, not just for ourselves," Marcus said, his voice rising above the murmurs. "We fight for our future, for the generations that will come after us. We fight for Earth. We fight because we are warriors, and the aliens will never again look at us and underestimate our strength." A cheer rose from the crowd, a rallying cry that echoed through the base. It was a sound of unity, of purpose, of a people who had finally realized their true power. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. The battle had begun, and they were ready. He could hear the hum of the alien ships overhead, the thrum of their energy as they prepared for the next wave of destruction. But this time, humanity would not be caught off guard. This time, humanity would rise. With a single command, Marcus led his group out into the streets, where the alien forces were already beginning to land. The warriors of humanity, fueled by the power of the awakening, charged forward with a force that was unstoppable. They fought not just with weapons, but with the raw power of their ancestors coursing through their veins. They fought with the knowledge that they were humanity's first line of defense, and they would not be defeated. The battle raged on, a clash of civilizations in the streets of the city. But despite the alien forces' advanced technology and overwhelming firepower, humanity fought with a ferocity and determination that no invader had ever seen before. The warriors were no longer just individuals, they were a united force, an unstoppable tide of strength and resolve. As Marcus fought alongside them, he could feel the power of the warriors who had come before him, guiding his every move. The fight for Earth was far from over, but in that moment, he knew that humanity had finally embraced its true nature. The first great warrior species was no longer a myth. It was a reality. And together, they would rise.